Every day we're getting closer to a major stock market crash or a financial crisis or both. And I think the only thing that might derail this in the short run, of course, nothing is going to derail it in the long run. This crisis is inevitable and will happen.
Prices go up all the time because the government is so involved. That's why it keeps getting more expensive. And the quality goes down. The quality of education. I mean, a high school degree, 50 years ago is way more valuable than a college degree today, even a master's degree.
The whole banking system is completely insolvent. And the Fed hasn't even raised rates anywhere near high enough to get rid of inflation. We actually need much higher rates than where the Fed stopped.
America, the land of opportunity, is on a path to crumbling beneath our feet. The widely coveted American dream is fast becoming a nightmare, and the warning signs are there for those brave enough to look. For years, the United States has been living on borrowed time and money. The cracks in the foundation of our economy have been growing wider, yet many refuse to see the warning signs. These are the words of Peter Schiff, the renowned economist and financial commentator who has been sounding the alarm on the state of the U.S. economy for over a decade. Schiff, a vocal critic of the Federal Reserve and the government's fiscal policies, has long warned that America's economic house of cards is on the verge of collapse. He has consistently cautioned about the U.S. economy and the United States dollar. In November of 2023, he warned of the U.S. dollar being near a historic crash, emphasizing that the U.S. economy will not see a soft landing. He said in October that owners of U.S. dollars would get destroyed. He also cautioned of a deep recession, an inflationary depression, an unprecedented financial crisis, and the biggest bond market crash. The numbers don't lie. The U.S. national debt has soared past $31 trillion, a staggering figure that amounts to nearly $94,000 per citizen. It's obvious how much Biden's government is drowning in IOUs, and yet they keep on spending like there's no tomorrow. In 2022 alone, the Federal Reserve printed over $5 trillion in new money, flooding the economy with cheap credit. But all that easy money comes at a cost. On another note, inflation is the silent killer of economies, and it's already begun to rear its head in the U.S. In June 2023, the Consumer Price Index showed a year-over-year increase of 2.8% in June and 3.4% in May. Prices for essentials like food, fuel, and housing are skyrocketing while wages stagnate. The purchasing power of the U.S. dollar is evaporating before our eyes. Despite visible moves by the U.S. government to resuscitate the economy, economists like Peter Schiff believe the country's situation might not be as positive as the headline figures suggest. Schiff's perspective starkly contrasts with the prerogatives of progress in the nation and challenges the optimism projected by the White House, highlighting underlying concerns that may not be immediately apparent. In this video, we will unravel the complexities surrounding the divergent viewpoints on the current economic situation in the United States. While headline figures may paint a rosy picture of economic growth and prosperity, there are dissenting voices, such as economist Peter Schiff, who offers a more critical analysis. Prominent American investor, financial commentator, and economist Peter Schiff has over the years gained significant influence for contrarian views and predictions. Renowned for his ardent criticism of the Federal Reserve's monetary policies and warnings about the impending collapse of the U.S. dollar and economy, Schiff's voice carries weight among those skeptical of mainstream economic narratives, making him an influential figure in financial and political circles. Schiff has long been a vocal critic of the U.S. Federal Reserve's aggressive monetary policies, warning that the unprecedented levels of money printing and government spending will inevitably lead to skyrocketing inflation that will cripple the economy. According to Schiff, the U.S. government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic, which involved trillions of dollars in stimulus spending and quantitative easing by the Federal Reserve, has created a monetary tsunami that will soon come crashing down on American consumers. What the Fed has done is create this massive inflation that's already begun to manifest itself in rising prices across the board, Schiff argues. The data supports Schiff's concerns. The U.S. Consumer Price Index, or CPI, a key measure of inflation, rose by 9.1% 8% in June 2022 compared to the previous year, the fastest pace of inflation in over 40 years. Prices for everyday necessities have skyrocketed, with the cost of gasoline up by 59.9%, grocery prices up by 12.2%, and the price of used cars and trucks up by 7.1% over the same period. While emphasizing that the U.S. dollar index closed at its lowest level since July, Schiff explained on December 21st, "More importantly, the technicals are breaking down. This couldn't come at a worse time. The Fed is planning interest rate cuts which will accelerate the decline and put renewed upward pressure on inflation." High interest rates are often viewed as a remedy for inflation, and the U.S. Federal Reserve has indeed implemented significant interest rate hikes. The effective federal funds rate has increased from 0.08% in February 2022 to 5.33% today. Despite the decline in the headline inflation rate, Schiff believes this is not a sign of victory for the U.S. Central Bank. He said that the latest CPI report shows the Fed has already lost the inflation fight because it cannot further raise rates, which according to him is what it needs to do. This is just the tip of the iceberg, the economist warns. When you have the Fed printing trillions of dollars, that money has to go somewhere, and it's going to drive higher prices. He points to the explosion in the Federal Reserve's balance sheet, which has grown from around $4 trillion before the pandemic to over $9 trillion today, as clear evidence of the central bank's reckless policies. Schiff believes that this unprecedented monetary expansion will ultimately undermine the U.S. dollar's status as the world's reserve currency, leading to a collapse in the government's ability to finance its massive debt burden. The U.S. is living on borrowed time, both literally and figuratively, he says. When the dollar crashes, and it will crash, the consequences for the American economy will be devastating. For Schiff, the parallels to the Canadian economy are concerning. Canada is even more vulnerable than the U.S. because it's more dependent on foreign trade and investment, he argues. When the global financial system starts to unravel, Canada will be hit even harder. Most countries are already dumping their dollar reserves and buying up gold. For example, Russia and China. According to Schiff, Russia and China are already dumping their dollar reserves and buying up gold at a record pace. They see the writing on the wall. If the dollar loses its reserve status, it would be catastrophic for the U.S. Imagine if all those dollars held overseas came flooding back home all at once. The resulting hyperinflation would make the Weimar Republic look like a picnic. The Weimar Republic, of course, refers to the period of hyperinflation in Germany after World War I, when the value of the German mark collapsed, leading to economic and social chaos. At its peak in November 1923, the inflation rate reached 29,500% per month, meaning that prices were doubling every few days. Life savings were wiped out, and people resorted to using wheelbarrows full of cash to buy basic necessities. While the U.S. has not experienced hyperinflation of this magnitude, Schiff sees it as possible if the country stays on its current course. We're already seeing the early warning signs, he says. Just look at the housing, stock, and crypto markets. Asset prices are being inflated by all this cheap money, creating bubbles that are bound to burst. As the specter of a potential black swan event looms, Schiff's warnings about the perils of unchecked money printing and the erosion of economic fundamentals have taken on greater urgency. For those concerned about the future stability of the American economy, Schiff's contrarian voice represents a cautionary tale that policymakers and citizens alike would be wise to heed. The labor market is another facet of the economy the analyst has been vocal about. Schiff's perspective on the labor market starkly contrasts with that of the White House. President Joe Biden recently highlighted the jobs report as proof that America's economy is the strongest in the world. Biden also celebrated other achievements of his administration, saying, "Our economy has created 14.8 million jobs since I took office. Unemployment has been under 4% for 2 full years now, and inflation has been at the pre-pandemic level of 2% over the last half year." Despite these accomplishments, Schiff remains critical. "Figures lie and liars figure," he said, paraphrasing a famous quote often attributed to Mark Twain. "And they're always going to try to spin these numbers and try to, put lipstick on a pig." But if you look at Biden's popularity, which is the lowest of any president in history, you know why he's so unpopular. It's the economy. Indeed, the U.S. housing market has been on a tear in recent years, with home prices rising at the fastest pace in over a decade. The median sales price of existing homes reached $416,000 in June 2022, up 13.4% from a year earlier, according to the National Association of Realtors. Meanwhile, the S&P 500, a broad measure of the U.S. stock market, rose by over 26.89% in 2021, despite the ongoing economic disruptions caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. For Schiff, these asset price booms are unsustainable and are setting the stage for a painful correction. When the bubbles pop, and they will pop, the fallout will be devastating, he predicts. Wealth will be destroyed, businesses will fail, and the economy will spiral into a deep recession or worse. The consequences of such an economic collapse, Schiff argues, would extend far beyond the borders of the United States. The U.S. is the world's largest economy, and the dollar is the global reserve currency, he explains. If the U.S. goes down, it will drag the rest of the world with it. A U.S. economic collapse would likely lead to a sharp contraction in global trade, as the flow of dollars that greases the wheels of international commerce would dry up. Countries that rely heavily on exports to the U.S. would see their economy shrink, while those with large holdings of U.S. debt would see the value of their reserves plummet. Moreover, a loss of confidence in the U.S. dollar and the American economy could trigger a broader financial panic, as investors rush to pull their money out of dollar-denominated assets and seek safer havens. This could lead to a wave of defaults and bankruptcies as businesses and governments struggle to pay their debts in a world of scarce credit and falling demand. A collapse of the U.S. economy would be nothing short of disastrous, with the potential to plunge the entire world into a severe and prolonged recession, if not an outright economic depression. To fully grasp the magnitude of such a scenario, one need only consider the sheer scale of economic activity that the U.S. drives. According to the World Bank, the U.S. GDP stood at $23 trillion in 2021, dwarfing the next largest economies of China at $17.7 trillion and Japan at $5 trillion. American consumer spending alone accounts for nearly 70% of its GDP, making it the engine that powers global trade and commerce. The interconnectedness of the modern global economy means that any significant disruption to the U.S. market would have cascading effects worldwide. As the largest importer of goods and services, a U.S. economic meltdown would devastate the export-driven economies that have become dependent on American demand. Moreover, the U.S. dollar serves as the world's reserve currency, underpinning the global financial system. A dollar collapse would trigger a catastrophic chain reaction as governments, businesses, and individuals scramble to offload their U.S. currency holdings. This, in turn, would lead to a severe credit crunch, skyrocketing interest rates, and the destabilization of international trade and investment flows. The ramifications would be felt in every corner of the globe. Developing economies that rely on U.S.-dominated debt and foreign direct investment would be among the hardest hit, potentially plunging millions into poverty. Even advanced economies like Germany, Japan, and Canada, which count the U.S. as their largest trading partner, would face severe economic headwinds. As the ominous clouds of economic disaster loom ever closer, the fate of the American dream hangs in the balance. The warnings of Peter Schiff and other dissenting voices echo with an unsettling urgency, painting a picture of a future where the foundations of the U.S. economy crumble beneath the weight of reckless policies and unchecked greed. Should the unthinkable come to pass and the American juggernaut succumbs to the ravages of inflation, debt, and a collapsing dollar, the reverberations would be felt across the globe, plunging the world into an abyss of uncertainty and despair. As the clock ticks ever closer to midnight, the question remains: will America heed the clarion call of those who see the writing on the wall, or will it steadfastly march toward the brink, oblivious to the looming calamity that could bring the entire world crashing down? If you liked this video, hit the like button and help us spread the word. And don't forget to subscribe to get notifications on our latest news and analysis. In the meantime, check out one of these videos here to learn more. Thanks for watching.